This time on One Foot Flipper, I read some magazines. Stay tuned. Hi, Paige here, One Foot Flipper. How's everybody doing? I am okay. It's Saturday, early afternoon, and today I think we're going to look at some magazines, or at least we're going to look at reselling magazines on eBay. We're going to look at the 8 great magazines or magazine types to pick up for reselling on eBay. And in all cases here, we're going to be looking for bulk purchases, not individual issues. Buying a single issue of a magazine to resell, that's expert territory. You need to be a magazine expert or to at least look up that single issue to see if it's worth it. And oftentimes it's not, or it's not nearly worth the kind of profit you'd make selling in bulk. I think first, though, what we're going to look at is what you want to avoid. No Time magazines, no Lifes, no National Geographics, no sports magazines from the past, 50, 55 years. None of that. Cooking magazines, housekeeping magazines, nope. Anything widely general interest that anybody in America would have looked at the time, nope, forget about it. Sure, there can be some gold in those areas, but it takes an expert to find it. And if you were a magazine expert, chances are you either aren't watching this video or you're already down in the comments telling me how wrong I am. Both of which are fine, by the way. Before we get into it, let's get into some honorable mentions here. Playboy magazine, pinup magazines, nudie magazines, nudist and naturist magazines, other men's magazines, gay interest magazines, and drug culture related magazines. These things don't tend to show up at garage sales very often, and they may be hard to sell depending on your platform of choice, or a simple rules change on the platform could make these magazines unsellable before you manage to sell them. So I didn't delve deep into that area, although there can be plenty of money in those areas. I just feel that's expert territory, and that stuff you usually don't, besides maybe the Playboys, you usually just don't see those at garage sales. Now, these 8 magazines or magazine types, I'm putting these in no particular order. Really, it's just the order I thought of them. And our first one, heavy metal magazines. Now, I'm covering both the magazine called Heavy Metal, which isn't actually about music. It's actually a comic/science fiction magazine aimed at adults, not at children. That was published since the 1970s and was doing great until Whatnot. Yeah, you know that Whatnot, the thing that people live auction on. Whatnot bought the magazine and then failed to produce another single issue and closed it down, which kind of takes me back to another video I once did called Does Whatnot Ruin Everything It Touches? It did ruin 45 years of Heavy Metal magazine just by touching it. But anyway, Heavy Metal magazines, those are awesome. And actual magazines about heavy metal, gonna be good in bulk as well. Whatever magazine it is, I know there's one called Metal. There's a bunch of them. Just you find that stuff's gonna be good. Somebody's gonna want it, guaranteed. Your number 2 is role-playing game magazines. Now, the only one of these that you're likely to randomly stumble across are Dragon, Dungeon, and White Dwarf. Dragon and Dungeon both serve largely the Dungeons and Dragons game, while White Dwarf largely serves Warhammer and the other games made by Games Workshop. There are dozens of other ones out there, like this is Challenge. Challenge was about science fiction games, late 80s, early 90s, but you're unlikely to ever see any others in the wild. I specialize in this stuff, and I never had an issue of Challenge magazine in my hands until this year, when somebody clued me in that there was a lot of 40 of them for sale about 10 miles from my house, so I went and bought them. If you are buying White Dwarf, you got to make sure that you're getting them in bulk at under $1 an issue, as White Dwarf does not sell well as single issues, unlike Dragon and Dungeon do. So you want your White Dwarf magazines, you want big stacks for cheap. You can pay a little bit more on Dragon or Dungeon, specifically the oldest ones, which you can, just look on the front cover, inside cover to see how old they are. Dragon goes back to the 70s and Dungeon goes back to the 80s. All right, next category. Custom car magazines, lowrider, mini trucking, hot rods, sport truck, rod and customs, really any magazines relating to car customizations. That's going to be a sure thing sale to somebody to get a collection of them. However, going to avoid your car enthusiast magazines like Motor Trend, or things that are just about regular cars or even supercars that aren't modified, as those don't hold nearly the same value unless they are super old. So, and if you're unsure, if you got a whole stack of them in front of them, go ahead and look them up. And your fourth category here, monster and horror magazines. There is a magazine called Monster that's a good find. You're going to find things in here like Fangoria, movie monsters. It doesn't matter what era these are from. These can be from the 50s. These can be from last year, if they still make that kind of magazine. I'm not sure if they do. I know they were huge in the 80s. I remember in 6th grade, any guy who had a bunch of Fangoria magazines was super cool, because you're going to get nice pricing in bulk for these, and there's a lot of different titles out there. Number 5, Nintendo Power and other video game magazines. Nintendo Power is going to rank at the top of the heap of the ones you'll actually find, while the other magazines that cover multiple systems and PCs, like Electronic Gaming Monthly, PC Gamer, they're worth far less, but they're still worth picking up in bulk. And when you're buying a Nintendo Power, the earlier the issue, the better. Particularly, like, the later issues when Nintendo had gone to disc systems and stuff are not worth nearly as much as the ones when the Super Nintendo, or better yet, the Nintendo was the primary system. Those are the ones that people want the most. And the first issue is the most valuable issue, despite the fact that it's actually the most common issue of the magazine. You see, before Nintendo Power, they had a Nintendo Fun Club magazine that was free. And there was a little order form you could get to join the Nintendo Fun Club inside many different cartridges. But they didn't do the Fun Club for very long. They went to Nintendo Power later. But if you sent in that Fun Club magazine, that Fun Club sign-up, for years, they would send you an issue 1 of Nintendo Power. I know I got my issue 1 of Nintendo Power in the mail 3 years after the magazine came out. So even though it's the single most common issue, it still sells for big money, mostly to those 30 to 35-year-old collectors who the NES was never their main console to begin with, but for some reason, that's what they collect. Anybody who's into video games notice that most of your big retro gaming YouTubers are 25 to 35 years old and should have had PlayStation 2, 3, or 4 be their primary console, not the NES. Different topic, though. All right, next category, Pulp Fiction. No, not the movie, but the genre. What you're looking for here is extremely old fiction magazines from before 1950, and the science fiction themed ones are going to be the most valuable, while the general action or Western ones are going to be less valuable. These are going to be great overall. Single issues are often sellable, although slowly. Even single issues of the action or Western ones are sellable all by themselves. And the single issues of science fiction can be even better. But downside is these don't show up super often. 7th category, Thrasher and other skateboarding magazines. And I'm going to bet as a crossover, BMX magazines as well. And any niche magazine like this, the older issues are going to be more desirable in almost every circumstance. All right, our 8th final category here is going to be wrestling magazines. Now, most other magazines about sports, they age about as well as a tuna salad sandwich does. But wrestling magazines, since wrestling is not really a sport so much as a spectacle, they're evergreen, and they're sellable regardless of the era or the promotion they feature. Wrestling fans, they love reading about what was going on with the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan in 1987. That's awesome to them, even though they know who won all the matches and who didn't win the matches and what was going to happen. It's still great nostalgia for them. They still enjoy it. You're going to do really good with those. Some of those older magazines had trading cards in them, and if the trading cards are intact, the value of the magazine can go way, way up. I remember my friend Chris, Helo's World, he found one with the trading cards intact, and he did really well on it. All right, I guess that's all I've got for today. Just a short video about magazines. What did I miss? Go ahead and post it in the comments. I know I missed a bunch of fancy schmancy low production magazines that had high cover prices. I skipped those because you're just not going to find those at garage sales. And if you do, there's too many of them to remember all the names of, unless you're a magazine expert in the first place, which it's not my specialty and probably not yours. Hey, if magazines aren't your specialty, why don't you subscribe to my channel and tell 3 other people about this channel? I could really use the subs. I've got a new leg to pay for in a month, and it's not paying for itself. Thanks. Hope to see you again soon.